And for those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Brenda Keene, and I've been a Sage 100 consultant with Associates for almost 8 years now. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. What we're covering today are the year-end procedures for the distribution modules. So I've listed some key steps first that might be important prior to performing any year-end processing. Of course, you would want to be sure that you enter and update all of your transactions for the year. There are some year-end module checklists available, and I can show you where you can find those. And you could, we also want to make sure that you create a backup. Myself, I like to make a backup company within Sage 100. That way, if anything goes wrong, it's very easy for me to just copy that back over to my live company and start my year-end process again. But that backup can also be a backup to a tape drive or whatever media that you are currently using. Another thing that I think gets overlooked a lot is there is a specific order that the modules should be closed in. It's a module closing order as recommended by Sage. And I have those listed right here. This is the module order of closing for distribution. This definitely isn't inclusive of all of the modules, but it's the most widely used modules for distribution. And basically, for the most part, the rule of thumb is kind of starting at the bottom and working your way up. So any other applications, any applications that feed into other applications, those on that feed into the others should be closed first. So purchase order and sales order both feed into inventory. So in that respect, purchase order and sales order should definitely be closed prior to closing inventory. And payroll, if you're using payroll, that would need to be closed before closing GL. But of course, they all need to be closed before closing GL. But as well, inventory, sales order feeds into accounts receivable, can feed into accounts payable. So that's the reason for this list in the order that it is. And I can show you where you can find this list as well. I know that in the updated version 2013, this module order of closing can actually be found in the help section. So let me back up for a second. On my list, I'm going to go through these in the order that I have them listed, with the exception of payroll. I'm going to save payroll for the end for two reasons. Payroll is always a little bit more involved, and also then those that are maybe using distribution can go through the distribution, but if you would like to drop off early and not listen to the payroll, then you have that option as well. So we're going to start with purchase order, and I'm going to go through all of my my slides here and discuss all of these items, and then we'll take a look inside of Sage 100 and the menus, and I'll show you where to find these things. So in purchase order, of course, you want to make sure that all of your receipts, any invoices, returns, everything is entered and updated. I would always recommend reviewing the setup options as well. Sometimes some of these options have to do with historical settings or the types of data that you are retaining, and you may want to make some changes there before you do your period end or year-end processing. Always be sure that your current PO date would agree with the year-end date, and then make sure you print your reports needed. Now, there's two different ways the reports can actually be printed. They can be printed directly from the reports menu. All of the period end reports are available directly from your purchase order reports menu. They can also be printed during period end processing. I, however, tend to recommend that they're printed from the reports menu prior to running the period end processing. And my reasoning behind that is just that if you start the report, or I'm sorry, if you go into your period end processing and you've got all these reports selected and you hit that OK button and it starts processing period end, so it starts throwing your reports out to a printer. If that printer has a malfunction and Mass 90 doesn't realize that, then the reports aren't getting printed, but now you've closed your period end, so some of that data you can't get back. So I always recommend printing any of the reports needed from the reports menu, making sure everything is reconciled, and then go to period end processing and just run the period end without printing any reports from that. During the period end process in purchase order, the tasks that are completed, there's a number of tasks that are completed. It actually sets the period to date, year to date quantity in dollars purchased fields to 0. It will remove completed POs from the purchase order entry files according to a setting in the purchase order option called days to retain completed purchase orders. It removes master and repeating orders that have expiration dates on or prior to the period end date, and it advances the current period and year in the purchase order options to the next period. The days to retain completed purchase orders is a setting in purchase order options, and the way that works is that you're allowed to set that up to 999 days. And so when you perform a period end or a year end process, the system takes a look at the completed purchase orders, and it takes a look at the completed date on that purchase order. And it says, if it has been completed longer than my days to retain completed POs, then it removes that purchase order from purchase order entry. So that's kind of a little explanation on that. Then if we take a look at sales order, some of these steps are a little, they're going to be alike. So again, we want to verify in sales order that all of our customer invoices have been entered and updated. We want to review the setup options. We want to make sure that our sales order date agrees with our year-end date. And then again, print the reports that we would need from the reports menu and complete our period end process. Again, when you're printing reports that you need for your period end, each customer might be unique in that. There might be different reports that you like to have on hand and that somebody else might not deem necessary for period end. So I suggest, taking a look at all of those reports and determining which ones you would like to keep at the end of each period, and then just make your list from there. And I also like to mention that if you are using paperless Office, all of these reports can be printed to paperless Office as well. During the sales year-end processing, the tasks that are completed is that it, of course, resets the periods for the current year, quantity shipped, dollars sold, cost of goods, and moves current year quantities in the sales order customer sales history file. It also removes any master and repeating orders from that open sales order file with expiration dates on or prior to the period end date. The period to date and year to date fields and recap data are purged according to the sales order setup options. History is purged according to your setup options. And then, of course, it advances the current period and or year in the setup options as well. After closing sales order and purchase order, we move into inventory. So where inventory is concerned, we need to make sure that all of our adjustments have been entered and updated. If we are performing a physical count, we want to make sure that that has been completed, and the physical count variance register has been updated. Again, we want to review the setup options for inventory. We want to be sure that our date agrees with the year-end date. We print our reports, and at a minimum, I've listed what I feel should be printed in inventory. You definitely want to print an inventory trial balance, and that is the report that is used to reconcile to your general ledger inventory account. Print a stock status and an inventory valuation as well. And then from the period end menu itself, you should also print an inventory negative tier adjustment if you are using one of the valuations such as LIFO or FIFO. What the negative tiers should all be resolved prior to processing your end. What that negative tier adjustment does is if at any point in time you would sell an item that has a zero quantity, it will then create what is referred to as a negative tier, and running and updating the negative tier adjustment register adjusts those negative tiers. And after you're satisfied that everything's been completed, you can go to the period end menu and process the period end. The tasks that are completed during the inventory processing, period end or year-end processing, are that it calculates the beginning average cost by item by warehouse and an average on-hand quantity by item by warehouse as well. It also resets the period-to-date and year-to-date quantities, and it moves current year information to the prior year field in the inventory item warehouse detail file. It removes any zero quantity costing tiers if you're using a LIFO, FIFO, lot, or serial item valuation. And then, of course, it advances the current period and year into in the options. For accounts receivable, we would need to verify all invoices and all cash receipts are entered and updated. If you apply finance charges, be sure that those have been run and updated. Print any customer statements that you may be sending to your customers. Again, review your setup options and be sure your date agrees with the year end. The minimum reports maybe to print in AR would be the AR trial balance, which is used to reconcile to the general ledger. You may also like an aged invoice report, a monthly cash receipts report. A sales tax report may be important if that's applicable, if you are actually charging sales tax. And if you're using the commissions feature in MAS, the salesperson's commission report. And then run your period end processing. The tasks that are completed during the year-end processing are that it purges the AR monthly cash receipts file, unless the AR options are set to retain. The period year-to-date fields in the customer master file are reset. It purges paid invoices from the open invoice file according to the AR option, days to retain paid invoices. And don't confuse this with your invoice history file. It only purges paid invoices from the open invoice file. At no time ever are any invoices purged from invoice history during period end processing. It will also purge any temporary customers with zero balances. It will purge various customer history files according to the options. And then, of course, it advances the current period to the next period in year. In accounts payable, you will need to verify that all of your invoices are entered, updated in both accounts payable and purchase order, that all of your checks are entered, printed, and updated. You will want to verify your 1099 data, and again, review the options. Make sure your date agrees. Print your minimum report. Again, the AP trial balance is the report that you should use to reconcile to the GL. You may also like an aged invoice report or a check history report. And then you would complete the processing. The tasks, again, that are completed during the year-end processing, it resets the period-to-date, year-to-date purchases, payments, discounts in the vendor master file, and moves that current year info to prior year fields. It will remove all temporary vendors and any associated memos with zero balances. It will purge zero balance invoices from the open invoice file according to the option days to retain paid invoices. And again, this is just like AR in that it's only going to purge zero balance invoices from the open invoice file, not the history invoice file. It will also purge vendor 1099 and check history according to your setup options. And then it advances the current period in the options. Then we come to the GL. And the first thing that I'd like everybody to keep in mind with General Ledger is that General Ledger can remain open for a number of periods, I'd say up to 24. I don't think that guideline is quite as strict as it used to be. I know at one point there were some issues if you left your General Ledger open more than 24 months, but I would say you're probably safe now. And the reason, of course, that General Ledger was set up or designed so that we could leave it open is that a lot of times we don't have our adjusting entries right away. So that gives us plenty of time to get all of our adjusting entries, to reconcile the GL, and get everything done so that we can then close it a few months later than any of the other applications. So when we are ready to close the GL, we just want to be sure that all of our activity, any adjustments in any of the other modules have been completed. If we have recurring journals, we want to process those. If we have allocations set up, we would need to be sure those are processed. Again, review your General Ledger options, and then process any journal adjustments, any transaction journals, and make sure that all of your daily transaction registers have been updated. The daily transaction register menu or task within the GL main menu can be run at any time. When it is run from the General Ledger main menu, it will print any and all transaction registers from any other modules. So you might want to add that to your list as something to always check before you close a period. Again, be sure your current GL date agrees with the year-end date. And as a minimum, I believe you should print the trial balance, maybe a detail report, and the standard financials. And then you can run the period end processing from the period end menu. During the period end process in General Ledger, all of the income and expense account balances are and postings are netted to the retained earnings account. It creates a next year's budget based on your setup options in the auto budget feature in GL options. And the transaction history is purged based on the setting in your GL options. And again, it advances the current period in the options just like the other applications do. And then we're on to payroll. When it comes to payroll, again, you want to make sure everything has been updated for the quarter and the year, that the payroll date is set to the last day of the calendar year. Payroll is always done on a calendar year. The correct tax tables are installed. So in other words, for this year, you would want to be sure you have the Q4 2013 tax tables installed. Again, you should review your payroll setup options. And some of the reports that you may want to print would be a quarterly tax report, the payroll check history, the quarterly governmental report from the period end menu, as well as the quarterly 941. You should then reconcile all of your quarter-to-date and year-to-date amounts on those reports. You may want to print your W-2s to paper and verify them. And after you're sure everything's been reconciled and you have verified all of your amounts, then you would need to copy your payroll and general ledger to another company for W-2 printing later, as well as a historical copy of that year's data. At that point, you could complete the period end processing for that quarter and the year end. And then you would want to install the tax table update for 2014 Q1. During period end processing in payroll, the quarter-to-date and year-to-date employee fields are set to 0, reset to 0. The quarterly tax recap is purged. The employee benefit limits are reset. It also resets the fields to 0 for the pension plan or cafeteria plan deductions, any deductions that have a limit. It sets all quarterly and yearly reports to 0, removes the check history and perpetual history depending upon your settings and your options again. Excuse me. It also will purge terminated employees and standard deductions that have met goals. And then, of course, it advances the options to the next quarter and year. As far as processing W-2s, you would first need to be sure to apply the latest Sage 100 product update, and then apply the Sage year-end IRD, or interim release disk. It used to be disk, and of course now it is something that we download from their website. And then reinstall the 2013 Q4 tax table update. And this is really a must, as it does affect W-2 printing. In prior years, I didn't believe that it had that much of an effect, but in talking more and more with Sage, I'm finding out that that's not the case, and they are always telling me it is a must. They won't budge from that. I know a lot of people don't like to do it, but to be sure that your W-2 printing is correct, you really do need to reinstall that 2013 Q4 tax table. And then you would run your W-2s from your company copy. And of course, before running additional 2014 payrolls in your live company, you would want to reinstall your 2014 Q1 tax table again. So with that, we're going to go into the software and take a look. And so if I open up Sage 100, if I go to my help section here, I'm just going to show everybody a few things that are available within the Help Center. And if I type in period end, if I look down my list, I've actually got a checklist in here for each one of these applications. And if I go even further, I see a period end processing FAQ, just a plain period end. So you can see there's quite a bit of information in here actually. Let's go to the FAQ. If I go to the FAQ, right here is in what order should the modules be closed. So if I open that up, there's my order of closing for the different applications within the system. And just some general FAQs. But if I actually wanted a checklist, if I open up Accounts Payable, here's a little bit of a checklist that Sage is designed for us. So it tells you, that backing up is important. Back up the AP files onto a monthly set of backup disks. Verify all invoices and checks are recorded. And it says if you are performing period end for December or the year, print, verify, and clear all 1099s. Perform period end or year end processing, and then select the reports to print. They've got this in here as part of the period end process. So the other things I wanted to take a look at is if I go to purchase order, and I go to setup, and I go to purchase order options, these are some of the options that they're suggesting or that we're suggesting that you review. One of them is right here, the days to retain a completed purchase order. So you can set this up to 999 days. And if I put my cursor in that field and I hit the F1 key, it brings me up the help section that gives me a little bit of an explanation for that particular field. The other thing that I might want to review is on the History tab. It says years to retain my purchase history. Do I want to retain receipt history? I can say yes, no, summary only, or until period end. Do I want to retain the comment line? And do I want to purge my purchase order recap information at period end? So year end is always a good time to review these settings. That way, if you want to increase them, you're not going to lose that history. The other thing in purchase order that's important to print is actually the purchases clearing report. The purchases clearing report is used to reconcile to that purchases clearing account. So, in other words, when you post receipt of goods and you have not posted the invoice yet, that amount remains in that purchases clearing account. And the purchases clearing report can be used to reconcile to that account. So if I print this report, the total in my report should match the balance of my purchases clearing account. So if I take a look this is sorted by PO number for inventory items only. There's my quantity order, my quantity received, and my quantity invoice. So if I've got a quantity ordered and if I've received that quantity but I have not yet invoiced it, it should reflect in my report total. And if I scroll down to the bottom of my report, oh, this isn't the report. Let me reprint this again, I'm sorry. I'm going to select this time not only my inventory items, but any miscellaneous or special as well. So this time it's including my special item, which is designated with an asterisk, or even my miscellaneous items as well that might be included in that dollar amount. If I choose to print the clearing in open PO format, what that does for me, and again I'm going to print, this will just print for all items. And if I open this up, this is the same report except in an open purchase order format. However, if I go to the end of my report, it's going to give me the total purchases clearing and then the total purchases clearing including any special or miscellaneous items. So this would be this should reflect the balance of that purchases clearing account. Are there any questions over purchase order?
We're going to try and unmute everyone again and see how it works, so you can ask questions if necessary.
Does anybody have any questions over the purchase order? No? If I take a look in my period end menu too, they now, in the newer versions, we have a period end report selection. So if I go into this period end report selection, I can actually remove reports that they have suggested, or I can add reports that I would like to print when I complete my period end processing. So then when I go into period end processing, if I do want to print those reports during my period end process, I would just make sure that this little checkbox is selected. And then when I click proceed, it's going to perform the period end process, and it's going to also print any of these reports that are included in this list. So this is where the reports are set up for the period end process itself. And then if I take a look at sales order, my period end menu just consists of the report selection and the period end process. But any of these reports can be printed or added to my period end report selection if I wish to do them during the period end process. And if I look at the setup options in sales order, again, the tab that I may want to look at would be the history tab. This is where all of the settings are as far as what is going to be kept and what is going to be purged during your period end. So do you want to retain your sales quote history? If so, there's a couple of other options. How many years would you like to retain that sales history? So I believe this can go up to 99 years. Do you want to retain lot and serial item sales history? Do you want to retain your customer's last purchase history? You can say yes, and it will retain any quotes, any sales orders, or any invoice history. If you say no or select no, nothing will be retained. If you select invoice, you're only selecting their invoice purchase history. You want to retain your backordered lines and invoice history, and your ship-to detail lines and customer sales history. And then do you want to purge your sales order recaps at the period end? So if you don't want to purge that information and you want to be able to go back and print that at any point in time, you would just unselect this setting. And then if we go to inventory, and we look at inventory management options, and I think they've moved these. There's nothing really in here that would be dependent on the history itself. However, the settings that you want to look at for inventory are contained in common information, and the common information options. Here's your years to retain item history. So you're only retaining your item history for as long as is specified in the common information item. In my reports menu is where I will find my stock status report, my valuation, and my trial balance. And if I print my trial balance, this is the report that I should be able to reconcile to my GL. And you can see it's going to give you a list of the item codes, the description, beginning balance and activity, and ending balance for the quantities as well as the dollar amount. And if I go to the very last page, these are my totals. And if all of these items are going to the same GL account, that should balance to my general ledger inventory account. And then in my period end menu is where I can find my negative tier report and my negative tier adjustment. Again, I can select any of these reports if I want to run them during that period end process. And if I open up period end processing, again, I can select to print those reports or not. And if I click proceed, we'll just go through one of these. It tells me exactly what period will be changed to what period. If I were doing this for year end, it would tell me that it would complete the year end processing as well. So if I say yes, I want to complete, and then if I go in there, I can see that it's now in period 6. And if I look in my setup options, it has actually incremented my current period there as well. The other thing is in physical count, if you are going to do a physical count, you always want to make sure that you stop all processing long enough to freeze and print a worksheet and to get all of those items counted. As soon as all of the items are actually counted, you can actually resume your operations as far as shipping and receiving. And while your shipping and receiving is going on, then you can go into physical count entry and enter those counts, print your variance register, and update those amounts, any adjustments that it makes. In accounts receivable, again, the options that you would want to take a look at are on the Additional tab, the Days to Retain Paid Invoices. And what this is talking about, again, is just in that open invoice file. So in other words, if I open up customer maintenance, and I can't open it up while I've got my options open, but if I open customer maintenance, and I select the customer, and I go to my Invoices tab, this lists all of my invoices that are in my open invoice file. My Transaction tab does that as well. And you can see here I do have some with zero balances because they've been paid or had a credit applied against them. So what happens during period end processing is it looks at the date this invoice was paid, and it says if that invoice has been paid longer than my days to retain, then I'm going to remove the information for that invoice from this file. That invoice will, however, remain in my invoice history, which I can always go back and look at from invoice history inquiry. The only time that your invoice history gets purged is if you would physically go, or manually, I guess, go into the Utilities menu and select to purge your AR history. So I could tell it I want to remove my invoice history, and I want to remove it on or before a specific date. I can also remove only the deleted invoices if I so desire. This is the only way that this information will get removed from invoice history. So again, if I go back to my setup options, I just want to make sure this is where I want it to be. And here is a selection now too, that I can also tell the system I would like to retain my temporary customers with paid invoices. If this is not selected, the temporary customers will get purged at period end or year end processing if they have a zero balance invoice. I would also recommend taking a look at the History tab. Here's the spot where you can set how many years you want to retain your cash receipts history. Do you want to retain your deposit transaction history? All, none, checks, credit card only, other types only. Here's some settings regarding invoice history and how you want to retain that, as well as your sales history. So you just want to make sure that all of these are where you want them to be. And generally, when it says years to retain, and you've got a 1 year in there or 2 years, if you have 1 year in there, it is only retaining the current year. If you have 2, it's retaining this year, your current year, and 1 year prior. And if I look at my report, I just want to point out the differences between the aged invoice report and the trial balance. And this is reflective of the accounts payable application as well. It works the same way in both AR and AP. The aged invoice report prints by invoice date. And it's for that reason that it's recommended that you reconcile your general ledger to your trial balance, or your AR trial balance to your general ledger, I should say. If I open up my trial balance and I print my trial balance, it prints by transaction date. And the transaction date is also the date that the transaction is updated to the general ledger. So if I print my trial balance and I take the total of my invoice balance field, that is what I need to reconcile to my ARGL account. So if I take my total invoice balance here, that should be equal to my general ledger AR account. You also have one of the other reports might be cash receipts report. This used to be referred to as the monthly cash receipts report, and they've changed it to just the cash receipts report, because if you keep that or retain that history, you can actually go back to prior years and prior periods and print this report now. Something that, I don't know, a few years ago, we didn't have this kind of detail. And again, the period end process menu is where you'll find your finance charge set up so that you can run your calculation, edit any entries, and then run that finance charge journal and post it. You can also print your customer statements from the period end menu. If you work with commissions, you can edit the commissions and run that register and update it. This match credits to open invoices, if you run that, it will take any credits that you have in your customer files, and it will apply them to the oldest open invoice automatically. And again, you've got your period end report selection. So you can add and remove reports that you might want if you're printing them during period end processing. If you're not printing them during period end processing, there's no need to really do anything with this list at all. But again, the period end process works the same as it does for all of the other applications. And then if we take a look at accounts payable in the setup menu, the options again. If we look at the additional tab, here's that days to retain paid invoices for accounts payable. And again, we can set that up to $999. And that's the same thing. It only pertains to those invoices in that open invoice file. I want to look at my history tab. I can set some of my history accordingly. Do I want to track detailed invoice and payment history, comment lines, retain my vendor history as far as purchases, include sales tax and freight, and how many years do I want to retain my 1099 history. If I retain this history and I close my year for AP, I can still go back and print my 1099s for that year. And then we're on to the GL. And the most crucial is the general ledger options. There's two items in here. One, of course, in my GL history. And again, that can be set up to 99 years. And then on my entry tab, my source journals, do I want to reset those journal numbers during year-end, period end, or do I want to set them to never reset? And then there is one other thing on my budget tab, and it's this little option right down at the bottom. It says copy actual to default budget at year end. Be very careful of that setting. What can happen there is, as you are all aware, I'm sure, is that you don't always close your GL, within a month or two of the year ending. And sometimes, some of you may import budgets from Excel. You may input them in those first 2 months or even prior to the year ending. So if you actually enter or import your budgets and you don't want the actual to become the default budget at year end, make sure this is not selected. Because if it is, and you perform your year-end process, that's going to overwrite all of the budget information that you currently have. And it's going to copy your actual to that information. And then again, of course, you would want to print your trial balance and make sure that's in balance. If it's not, you'll need to reconcile that. And they do give us a little general ledger worksheet. I don't think it gets used a lot, but it actually can be used to help you determine what your adjusting entries should be. So if I preview that, it's just a simple listing of each and every account with the current debit and credit balance, whatever the case may be. And then you can actually add your adjustments and then calculate the adjusted balance. So we can unmute this, or are we muted, Lori?
Yeah, we are muted at the moment, but I will try and unmute it again.
My year end for payroll, one of the very first things we recommend is that you actually make a copy of your payroll data as well as your GL data. And that is very easily done under Library Master, Main, and Company Maintenance. And the time that you would want to make this copy is after everything is reconciled and you're sure that everything is correct for the year and the quarter, the last quarter. but right before you close that year in payroll. Because we want the ability, if you close the year, everything's gone. So we want to copy it right before we perform the closing process. So if I come into company maintenance, the first thing I want to do is create the company I'm going to copy that to. So if I do a lookup, I can see these are my existing company codes. And I want to copy ABC company. But I don't want to select it here and then click copy, because then it tells me that that's my destination company. So just make sure you don't make that mistake and copy something else over top of that one. But normally speaking, generally speaking, I would believe we're creating a new company. So I might call this P13 for ABC Payroll 2013. And then I can select my copy button, and I can say OK. It tells me the record must be saved, and I'm like, sure, that's fine. And then I go and tell it what company am I going to copy. I want to copy my ABC. So when it does that, it pulls everything up. But I don't need to copy everything. I'm going to unselect that. But I do know that if I copy payroll, I have to have GL as well as my common information. Those are two applications that it has to have. So if I'm doing 1099s, I may want to copy my AP as well, although it's not really necessary. So then I go ahead and I click proceed, and it says, do you want to copy all data files to the selected company? And I say, yes, I do. And it's very important then when you're making this copy that nobody should be in the system, just to ensure that you actually get a good copy. So now I've actually created my copy of my ABC. And from this copy, I can actually run my W-2s at a later time. This enables me to go ahead and complete my closing for payroll, for the year for payroll, so that I can run another payroll for the new year. While then I can also go back to my copied company and create my W-2. If I go into my payroll setup options, some of the options I might want to take a look at are years to retain any e-filing check history, which will come into play soon. Retain year-to-date check history. This is always a good one, retain my perpetual payroll history. So I can just take a look at any of those settings. You might also want to review how your benefits and so forth are set up. Year-end is always a good time to maybe take note of all of those types of items. So basically, it would just be the first and second tab that you might want to take a look at. So after I have determined that everything matches, and I've printed out all of my reports that I need to print, as well as those reports for my period end, I can then actually go into period end processing, and I can choose. In payroll, you actually have to make a choice. This is a little bit different than the other applications. So am I doing just quarter end processing, or am I doing quarter end and year end? And if I choose quarter end and year end, then it tells me down here a little warning that my W-2 forms must be printed As long as I've got that copy company out there, I'm okay because I can actually print my W-2s from that. Let's see, I'm not sure it's going to let me. I'm only in quarter 2 here. But if I click proceed, it says payroll options indicate payroll is not in the 4th quarter. Do you want to continue? And I can say yes. And I can see. And then again, it pops up at this point and says, do you want to print the following reports? If I've already printed these reports and reconciled them, I can unselect those. I would still have to click print. And then it says, do you want to complete? And I say yes. And now it's completed my period end process. So if I do go back into my setup options, I will now see that my processing year has gone from 2010 to 2011, and I am now in the 1st quarter. Now when it comes to printing W-2s, I've also listed those steps, and again, you just want to be sure that you've got the correct product update installed. To find out what product update and what version you're on, you can go to your Help menu, and you can select About Sage 100, and that version shows up right here at the top. So it says Sage 100 Standard ERP 2013, which is also version 5.0, and then the .9 is representing the product. Is that the product update? I believe the 9 is the product update that's installed on here. They were, at one time, they were putting it right behind the 5, so like 5.00.0 or .456, but I think it's now in this position. I'll have to double check that to be sure. But anyway, you'll need to know what product update is installed, because when Sage creates the year-end update, it is always pertaining to a specific product update as well. So in other words, this year, you would have to be on the following versions in order to be able to apply Sage's year-end update. You would need to be on 4.4 with product update 1 through 10 could be installed. Versions 4.5, it would be product updates 1 through, or 0, that you don't even have to have one installed, through product update 7. And 2013 would be product updates 3 and 4. Those will work with the year-end updates. So if you're not, so for instance, if you're using 2013 payroll, but you're only on product update 2, we would first have to install product update 3 or 4 before we actually install the year-end update. So then after that year-end update is installed, then you would need to reinstall the 2013 quarter 4 tax table. The 2013 year-end update, what that does is it applies any changes to the W-2 forms as well as any changes needed in the payroll program itself. It also applies any changes for the 1099 forms and the accounts payable program. The 2013 Q4 tax table sometimes has some settings regarding the W-2s, so that's why that needs to be installed. Then you would go ahead and align your W-2s and print those from your company copy. And then after you're satisfied and you've verified that your W-2s are correct, you would then go ahead and reinstall that 2014 tax table update, and you're ready to continue processing your 2014 payrolls. I also want to add that 2013 will be the last year that Sage will support the W-2 and the 1099 printing. For 2014 and beyond, we will begin using e-filing and reporting from Atrix. Atrix allows us to print our W-2s and our 1099s to plain paper, as well as offer an e-filing for a per employee rate. And I just got a glimpse of an email from Sage that does give us a lot more information as far as the e-filing is concerned, as well as a website that we can actually go to that will give us some ideas on that pricing. Yeah, and we will get that info to you as soon as we can. Another thing is that Sage will have their year-end update available as of December 20th, as well as, I believe, their 2014 Q1 tax table update. So if you need help installing those, let us know, and we'll get you on our schedule. And I think I've covered everything, so we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions again. If there's anything else you want to see, or if you have any questions, please let us know.
Okay, everyone's mic is unmuted now. If you could please ask any questions that you have. We will also, as I mentioned before, send out the PowerPoint to everybody, and additional information on the changes that Brenda mentioned with printing of W-2s and Atrix and all of that. We'll get all that information out to you. Okay, if no one has questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up and let you get back to your day. I appreciate your time, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.